Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
I'm pleased to join my colleague, Senator Kaine, and so many others who are here on the floor today to talk about the hardship that has been created for so many Americans by this government shutdown, a government shutdown that is wasteful, that is unnecessary, and that is totally about politics. Today is the 17th day since this partisan brinkmanship shut down 9 out of 15 cabinet departments and dozens of government agencies that we depend on to protect our health and safety. And we could reopen government's doors today if Senate Republicans take up the bills that were passed by the House, bills that were written and overwhelmingly approved by the Republican-controlled Senate just a few weeks ago. So if there is bipartisan and bicameral agreement on the appropriations bills, why has government shut down? Well, sadly, it's because the president wants to force American taxpayers to foot the bill for an ineffective and costly wall on the southern border, a wall that the president promised Mexico would pay for and that is opposed by the majority of Americans. Meanwhile, the men and women who work in agencies that protect the American people and who protect our borders are either not working or on the job but not getting paid. In total, more than 380,000 federal employees have been furloughed and more than 450,000 are working without pay. And the effects of this shutdown affect the entire country, including New Hampshire. Because it's not just the thousands of federal workers who are affected by the shutdown. It's also harming millions of Americans who depend on essential services provided by the affected agencies, people like those Senator Kaine described. Last Friday, I had a chance to meet with farmers in New Hampshire who are affected because of the ongoing closure of the Department of Agriculture's Farm Service Agency. They're not receiving essential services and loans they need to prepare for spring planting. And so many dairy farmers who have been under extreme hardship anyway because of the tariffs with China and falling dairy prices, talked about what the impact is on them. Last year, New Hampshire dairy farmers lost $1 million because of the tariffs. And our farmers tell me they're in danger of losing several million more this coming year. And so they can't afford to have another hit. And the fact that the dairy program, this new Dairy Safety Net program, which was passed in the Farm Bill, and congratulations to Senator Stabenow, the ranking member of the Agriculture Committee. She and Senator Roberts did a great job in providing help for the first time for so many dairy farmers. But they can't benefit from that right now, even though they're hurting because of the tariffs, because the program is delayed in implementation. So they don't know how long they'll be able to hold on before they're able to get help. Furloughs have also slowed work at the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the programs that it oversees that are integral to New Hampshire's effort to fighting the deadly opioid epidemic. These are programs that everybody here who's getting ready to speak has sees the effects in their states because of the delays. Last year, New Hampshire had the second highest rate of deaths due to opioid-related drug overdoses. And continued delays from the agency will pull the rug out from under our first responders who rely on ONDCP resources and critical federal opioid response efforts. You know, just as we're beginning to see some progress in fighting the opioid epidemic because of the work of Congress, we're seeing steps backward. And of course, air traffic controllers. I visited last Friday with New Hampshire's air traffic controllers to discuss how the shutdown is affecting their operations and safety at our airports. I've received 38 handwritten letters from New Hampshire air traffic controllers who are opposed to the shutdown. And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that these letters be included in the record.
Without objection.
Air traffic controllers keep our airways safe, but as we all know, they're being asked to work long shifts without being sure they're going to get paid for that work. One air traffic controller I heard from was recently transferred to the Boston area, which is covered in New Hampshire. She's the sole provider to her mother. Now she's paying not only her mortgage, but her mother's mortgage. And in a letter she addressed to my office, she wrote, "As a sole source of income to my household, the foreseeable future of this shutdown is detrimental. It has created a substantial burden not just on me, but on the thousands of federal employees that it's affecting." And sadly, the shutdown also stands to affect the safety of air travel. Not because our air traffic controllers aren't on the job. They are on the job. They're doing the work even though they're not getting paid. But the fact is, the men and women who provide administrative and maintenance functions on the runway, those people who fix equipment when it stops working, who are in the control tower and in airport facilities, they won't be at work to support our air traffic controllers. So when a runway or taxiway light goes dark, it's going to go unrepaired. That jeopardizes the safety and the efficiency of aviation operations. And then there are the impacts to those agencies that are funded by the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill. And I understand this particularly well as the ranking member on the CJS Subcommittee of Appropriations. I know what a devastating effect the shutdown is having on these agencies. More than 41,000 law enforcement agents at the Department of Justice, including agents within the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Bureau of Prisons, they're working for IOUs. And we're hearing this directly in New Hampshire, where every staff member at the Federal Correctional Institution in Berlin, New Hampshire, which is in northern New Hampshire, they are accepted. That means they're required to report for work, and they're not being paid. And I'd like to read an excerpt from a letter I received from Chris Allen. Chris is the president of the union there at FCI Berlin, who represents 180 staff members. He highlights the kinds of choices that staff members are being forced to make. He says, and I quote, "While some staff members can call and potentially have a mortgage or a car payment excused if they're missing only one source of income, even buying simple groceries or paying for child care becomes difficult for a family when all sources of income have been stopped and you're required to continue working." And again, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Chris's letter be included in the record.
Without objection.
So, because of the shutdown to the Department of Commerce, it's not processing U.S. companies' requests to be excluded from the President's steel and aluminum tariffs, and that delay will cost companies millions of dollars. It will increase economic uncertainty. And the shutdown is preventing the Department of Commerce from assessing new anti-dumping and countervailing duties cases that help ensure our companies are competing on a level playing field. And finally, the shutdown, like all shutdowns, is going to put a lasting burden on the economy. The 16-day shutdown in 2013 cost the government $2.5 billion in pay and benefits, and it lowered fourth quarter gross domestic product for the country by about $3 billion in lost output. The 2018 Trump shutdown has furloughed about 380,000 employees, nearly half of the number furloughed in 2013. So it's fair to say that the shutdown has already cost the government at least $1 billion, and the number is growing every day. The toll the shutdown is taking on the American people was completely avoidable. That's what's so frustrating. And it's frustrating, I know, to everybody in this chamber. Last week, the House passed legislation to reopen the government that's virtually identical to legislation that passed the Senate or was reported by the Appropriations Committee with strong bipartisan margins. In fact, here, as we remember, that continuing resolution to allow us to keep negotiating passed by a voice vote. So I urge Senator McConnell to bring these bills to the floor. Let President Trump decide to sign them or not sign them. He can make that choice as president, but we are a separate branch of government, and it's up to us to make the determination to end the shutdown immediately and to do what is right for the American people. We need to ensure that all government employees affected by the shutdown receive the pay they deserve, and I know there's legislation led by Senators Cardin and Collins to do that. And I urge Congress to take up and pass this critical legislation as soon as possible. One of the most fundamental constitutional duties of Congress is the appropriations process, to supply annual funds for federal programs that support national defense, transportation, small businesses, food assistance for low-income families, research and development, and so much more. And right now, by refusing to allow legislation to reopen the government, this Senate, this Congress, is failing millions of Americans who are suffering as a result. So I urge President Trump, Senator McConnell, Congressional Republicans to reopen the government, to allow Americans to get back to work.